Our guest today is Tori Miller Liu. Tori is the president and CEO of AIM International. Tori came to AIM last fall, and prior to that was the CIO of the American Speech and Hearing Association. Tori's been hard at work building a new strategic plan for AIM and helping to design the upcoming AIM 2023 conference. So Tori, welcome to AIM On Air. It's been great to have you come on board, and I'm sure many of our AIM members are going to be curious to learn more about you and your background and the plans for AIM. So to get us started, can you tell us a little bit more about Tori? What should everyone know about you?
Sure. I'm an association management professional. I'm actually certified as an association executive. As you mentioned, I was most recently the CIO at the American Speech Language Hearing Association. Before that, I was a vice president at a small data analytics firm. And before that, I was VP of strategy and technology for a trade association representing refrigerated warehousing and trucking companies. So I've been in the association space my entire career. I'm deeply passionate about technology and AIM's mission. And I should also mention I'm very passionate about diversity and technology, and I'm on the board of directors for a group called Association Women Technology Champions that advocates for women and their growth in the association technology community. And yes, there is an association for everything.
There seems to be. Now, I'm somewhat familiar with the American Speech and Hearing Association. It seems quite a bit different than AIM. How does your experience at ASHA help you in your new role at AIM?
Yeah, I think what the value is from coming from a CIO position is I have actually led information management projects. So I've been in that role where all of a sudden we had to comply with GDPR. All of a sudden we needed to figure out how we were collecting and storing information in SharePoint. I've been part of those conversations. I've been part of migration projects. So I will not profess to be an information management professional by any stretch of the imagination. I think that requires certification and years of experience, but I have a level of understanding and empathy for what our members do and a great appreciation for their work.
Now, I know that you've been busy talking with everyone, really talking to our constituents, our members, the people that work at AIM, and you've been gathering a lot of information and perspective. What are the similarities and differences between the two organizations now that you've been with us for a while?
Well, the American Speech Language Hearing Association's significantly larger. So they have about I think last count was 218,000 members across mainly the United States, 300-person staff, and just a different scope. They have accreditation, certification, membership, lots of training. So, AIM's smaller in size, but I would say our mission's no less significant, no less important. I think associations like ours are formed with the intent to help the community, to bring the community together, to lift each other up. And I firmly believe in the phrase, high tides lift all ships. I think that's what associations do. If everyone's successful, the profession will be successful.
All right. So now that you've been casting about, getting perspectives, getting ideas, getting a new strategic plan sort of starting in place, what do you feel are the biggest challenges that AIM faces today?
That's a good question. And I should also amend your question a little bit.
Please.
The strategic plan is developed by a board of directors with the input of our membership. So I believe firmly in the principle that an association should be for the people, by the people, to plagiarize Abraham Lincoln a little bit there. So we are in the process of developing a strategic plan. We do have objectives and strategy for this year, which I'm happy to talk about, but I really want to collaborate with our leadership and our members to develop the strategy and the future for our organization. And that strategy, I believe, will lead to radical change for both the association and hopefully the industry. I think what we will see this year is a transformative period where, as an organization, we need to figure out how we will pivot to respond and proactively lead the changes we're experiencing in this industry. And I'm talking about artificial intelligence. I'm talking about market consolidation. I'm talking about um, broadening our net to include more companies than we may have typically included in the traditional information management landscape. So I think we are absolutely at a crossroads from a societal, technological, and economic standpoint where we have an opportunity to lead this industry into the next era.
So tell us more about what do you see coming on board for us here in the short term? Tell us about how AIM is reimagining itself, as you mentioned, and what have been the results of the planning so far at AIM? What will be changing and what will remain the same?
Yeah, well, I can share a little bit about what we're focused on this year. And I won't, I don't want to talk about, the 2024 strategy, because again, that's really up to the board and the membership to decide. And I have my own opinions and biases, but the beauty of a board working with an executive director of an association to develop a strategy is it's a collaborative process. And I think that collaboration leads to better outcomes. But the board did just meet last week, and we have a 2023 strategy with some objectives attached to it, which I've kind of likened this year to yeah, absolutely. Yeah. For us, this is a year of transformation where I feel like we as an organization are preparing for radical change. So the work we do this year, it will be key to that change management. So one of our first objectives is identifying what that North Star is and crafting a strategy and looking at how we develop and maintain partnerships in our space and combining that idea of strategy plus partnerships to lead to that radical change that we want to achieve in 2024. We're also going to be taking a look at content and looking at how we can drive growth for our membership and our association with future-focused content. And that means focusing content on new technology and trends, but also focusing on content that could appeal to the next generation of leaders. And when we say content, we mean it in sort of a different sense than our members do. I'm not talking about unstructured data. I'm talking about our conference, our webinars, our blog, our online training. It's all of that content that delivers education and information to our membership. The third one, and there's 5 of these.
Okay,
do you
please.
want to say something, Kevin? Sorry.
Oh, no, please. I'm curious to know.
So yes. The third one, the third is engagement. So we want to re-engage with our members and make sure that we're delivering exceptional value. So that means taking a look at all of our different membership segments and figuring out what is the job to be done? What is the need that you have of this organization? And are we delivering it? And how are we exceeding your expectations and even hopefully delighting you? So there's a bit of design thinking and user research as part of all of this. We also want to build a thriving community of thought leaders. And I'll pontificate on that one for a little bit because, in the past, I think AIM has really positioned itself as a thought leader. And I think we still are in this industry, but as an association, it's really important that we create a stage for our members to be the actors. So it's more important that we elevate and recognize members and hold them up as thought leaders in the space. So that's what I mean when I say a thriving community of thought leaders, and really rebuilding that for AIM. And finally, we want to look at creating more agility for the organization. So how do we become operationally excellent so that we can pivot if there is radical change, which I think that concept of agility, whether it's diversifying revenue models or diversifying or improving practices, probably is not too unfamiliar to the listeners here, because my belief is with every information management project, you're thinking about that agility. It can't be a rigid thing. It has to be sort of an organic, responsive practice, right?
So when it comes to having members be the knowledge leaders, how will that affect or will it affect things like the CIP certification and training programs?
Well, that's a good question. So one is how those programs are developed. And right now we are revising the CIP. And there is a task force of 40 some members that are helping to do that. They're going to beta test the exam. They're coming up with direction for the item bank and the exam itself. So that's one way. Those wonderful volunteers are absolutely thought leaders when it comes to the CIP. And when it comes to training, I think that for us is an opportunity to figure out how, instead of an AIM staff member, for instance, presenting a speech or presenting a training, how do we get the foremost thought leader in our community to present that training? I think you'll see at our conference, AIM 23, that the sessions are really about member-to-member educational experiences and what we can learn from each other.
One of the things that I have noticed in looking at some of the AIM research over the last couple of years is that it has uncovered some interesting findings. One of them being the gap between our efforts with technology, whether that be targeted at digital transformation or records management or information governance, and the actual strategies of members' organizations. Members tell us there's often a gap there that can be difficult to overcome from both the C-suite level and the working folks level. How do you feel that AIM can help organizations and their members address that gap between business strategy and technology strategy?
I think we provide a ton of resources that talk about how to communicate with leadership and to identify value proposition. And I think it just simply starts with that. It's connecting information management to revenue, even indirectly, is key. It's positioning information itself as an asset to an organization. And I've been in those shoes, and I've had to do that, and I've had to push data and information in that way with leadership so that they could see that this isn't just a compliance issue. This isn't just risk management. If we figure out how to leverage information and data as an asset, we can actually use that for growth in our business, in our entity.
And AIM perhaps was at the early edge of it, but AIM is not the only place that's talking about that gap and how it can affect success rates. I was doing some research for a project just this week, or last week, I should say, and looking at this statistic that we often see, that 70% or more of digital transformation efforts fail. And why is that? And the top thing that was mentioned in that research was this sort of gap between the perception of information management and the strategic value of it, or how it really affects the business. Do you feel that will be continuing to be a theme for AIM? And again, how do we bring sort of the education and awareness of that metric to the body of AIM members to really make a difference?
That's an interesting question. I'd have to do some digging into the statistics myself. I feel like the failure of any project, whether it be a technology or an information management project, is, in my mind, too nuanced to blame it on any one thing. I don't know if I love that statistic that it's because there's a disconnect between business strategy and information management strategy. I think it's very likely that if you did a retrospective on those projects, that there would probably be some shortcomings in change management. There might have been a lack of a leadership sponsor. I mean, there's so many reasons why a project could fail. I'd also love to, sorry, this is the data analyst in me. I would love to pick apart the definition of success and failure with an information management project. And that definition is so organizationally specific, but is it a failure if you've introduced information management to your organization? Is it a failure if you created a new system and you learned from that experience that maybe that wasn't the correct system for you, maybe, or you learned that the migration wasn't complete and there's still data or information in an old system that has to be migrated at some point? I think everything's evolution. It's much more interesting to talk about evolution and learning to me than the black or white of failure and success.
Well, that statistic, some of that could be hype, and generally speaking. I think what I observe is really recognizing, how do you define success, and what are the measures that measure that success? Is it just sort of,
Yeah.
we will be successful and that'll be great, or is it this, this, and this, and this is exactly how we measure it against what we have previously? And I think that may indeed be the paradigm that needs to be implanted in some of our efforts, to be sure that there's that connective tissue there between what we define as success for that particular organization and how we actually measure it. And that's really getting into a lot of C-suite areas that I think many of us really haven't been, swimming in those waters before, but it is ever so important to connect that. What are your feelings about the whole idea of information governance and business opportunity? Is information governance no longer a worthwhile term for what we do? In other words, it's a broader picture than just being a governor of information and keeping it safe. We're really now talking about making a transition of making information a vital part of the performance of the organization in terms of profit and market share and some of those measures. Do you feel that we need a new do we need a new description for what we do in this industry?
Yeah, maybe we do. I mean, it's so hard to get, I just came from a speech language pathology organization, so it's really easy for me to get hung up on the language. I think probably the more important conversation is around, well, then how do we define governance in this new age of artificial intelligence? What does that governance actually look like? And as you said, maybe it's not just about risk and compliance and rigidity. It's also about, how do we create accessibility? How do we fuel business processes? How do we create new workflows that empower staff to make better decisions, empower customers to reach better conclusions or conversions, what have you? I think it should definitely be a broader role. I would also put my flag in the ground that I think information management professionals are the best positioned individuals to look at both data and information. I think from a technical standpoint, it's important to distinguish between structured and unstructured data. From a governance standpoint, I think that and a strategic standpoint, I think it's less important to do so. And I think information management professionals could be larger and more vital assets to organizations if they have purview of both unstructured and structured data.
Yes, very good. Well, you mentioned things like AI, ChatGPT. It seems to me, it feels like things are changing really rapidly right now. What role do you feel AIM should play in leading that change and leading the industry into a new era?
I think our role is to help information management professionals and organizations make sense of this exponential growth in the volume and velocity of data. I also see it as our role to help individuals recognize what considerations and questions should be asked in this new era. I've been talking a lot with other association executives and members and staff about the veracity and value of data. So I love generative AI. I love talking about ChatGPT and the amazing technologies and advancements we're seeing. But I don't think we're having enough conversations about how you vet that data and how we have some ethical responsibility to be clear and transparent about when we're using AI output, whether it's in marketing copy or in contracts, anything like that. I think there at least needs to be a conversation about, how are we going to use this? How are we going to communicate to the reader or the consumer of this information that it has been used? And then when we are using it and producing this output, how do we evaluate the output for veracity? How do we really measure its value? And I think we're all seeing some of those articles about ChatGPT not always being correct and needing to have human intervention to gauge its veracity. And as a result of that, also gauge its value. Just because it's easy to generate doesn't mean that you should use it, doesn't mean that you shouldn't vet it. I think it's something that you should have a healthy dose of skepticism and critical thinking.
Well, that's part of the governance, part of information governance, isn't it? If we were good governors, we should be ensuring the veracity. But how do we do that? I mean, it seems like that would be an honor system, unless there is some sort of legislative hooks into doing so. Do you believe that that's going to be required for this level of veracity that you mentioned to really become a reality?
Yeah, I think I was talking to one member and we were comparing it to the early days of the internet, which was absolutely the wild, wild, wild west before there was some standardization and regulation around it. And so I think we're yet in the early days, which doesn't mean that companies can just ignore it. I don't think if you're a socially responsible company, you can ignore the ethical questions around AI and just say, well, I'll just wait until like someone standardizes or regulates this. And then in the meantime, I'm not going to worry about it. We have a responsibility to have the conversations about how we're going to use any new technology, whether it's AI or the metaverse or cryptocurrency. You should have those conversations about what is the ethical use of this technology and what is my responsibility as a citizen in society.
Look at what we've been talking about. We've been talking about ethics. We've been talking about business acumen. We've been talking about information veracity. We've been talking about legislation. None of these things sound like the stuff we used to always talk about. So it's just in our conversation here today, I can see and hear and feel the sort of winds changing in the industry. Is that where you think we'll be headed in another 5 years from now? Do you feel like we will have moved away from things that we always talk about in terms of governance, security, compliance, and really be talking about these more almost bigger, more lofty issues when it comes to using information both pragmatically and ethically?
I mean, possibly. I think the conversations about governance and risk and information management and governance, those are the foundations for our conversations. I don't know if we can ever abandon the foundations of good practice. I would hope to view those more as like guiding lights as opposed to something that we move past. I think everything we do today is built on the backs of those early pioneers who were doing microfiche and I think the year is actually 1943 or 44. We're not quite settled on the year of our founding just yet, but that advance this profession. So yes and no. That's the answer. There we go.
Right. Well, I do want to ask you about the upcoming conference here in a moment, but you mentioned early on that you're deeply involved and passionate about inclusiveness in the industry for women, and I imagine everyone really. Why are you so passionate about that? And really, what can each of us do to help ensure that our industry is more inclusive and more modern in its business approach to everyone involved, women, men, people of color, trans people? Why are you so passionate about that?
I'm passionate about it probably from just a personal point of view. The IT industry is heavily male dominated. So I know my path wasn't always easy, that sometimes I was the only woman in a room of men. And it, as a young woman, it can feel really alienating and frightening. And so I very much wanted to help other women in the space and people of color in the space to find a home in technology, especially if you love technology. It's so discouraging to love something and then be discouraged because you feel like there's no community welcoming you. So I wanted to create a welcoming community, and I want that for AIM. I want us to take a look at diversity, equity, and inclusion because it's simply good for business, but it's also, I think, an ethical responsibility. I think it's important that we encourage diversity in any community that we have a part in, right? And for AIM and for our industry, we also know that if we don't do that, we are likely to not have membership 10, 20 years from now. It's important to create a welcoming place for gender, ethnicity, color, because that's our membership of the future. That's who we need. And we want that diversity of thought for innovation, right? You want people of different experiences to contribute to the new vision for your organization and your industry, because it'll be better for it.
All right. The AIM 2023 conference is coming up here in New Orleans in April. What should attendees expect this year?
It's going to be a fabulous conference. Aside from the fact that we're in the beautiful city of New Orleans, which is world renowned for its music and food, we will have 50 plus education sessions, and its topics ranging the gamut from information governance to Microsoft, to IDP, to ethics, to artificial intelligence. So it's going to be, from a content standpoint, I think a really exciting conference, and a place where you can get a really strategic and broad perspective across the information management space. Every pillar of the CIP is going to be covered there. The other things I think I'm excited about, that I hope others are looking forward to, is we are going to do a keynote panel on our latest industry watch research. So that's a benchmark on what's the industry looking like, how are people viewing the information management space. So we'll have a keynote panel kicking off the entire conference and talking about the questions that attendees should be asking throughout the conference and asking of fellow attendees. We are also going to have a keynote on foresight. So we have a foresight expert coming in, talking about the importance of foresight when you're thinking of strategy and information, and foresight being, a forward-looking perspective, right? Not just thinking about the next 3 years, but thinking about the next 30 years and what will this industry look like, and how do we use that to inform our decisions today. We're going to have a C-suite panel on information management. So I have CIOs, chairman, chief delivery officer speaking on a panel about their perception of the information management space. So I think the conference will also be an opportunity to self-reflect and kind of hear how we are perceived as an industry, and use that to inform our path moving forward. We also, for the first time, have delegations of students coming to the event. So we have 3 local New Orleans universities sending delegations, and they'll be doing a panel led by Jason Cassidy with Shiny Docs on the future of the information management industry and next generation perceptions of employment with information management and of employers in general. So I think that's going to be a really interesting opportunity to hear from Generation Z and hear what they think of this industry, and also answer some of their questions. They are so excited, the students that I talked to, about meeting our members and participating in this event. And we have, I'll mention, the students are coming from Tulane University, Louisiana State University, and Dillard University. So it's going to be a great group. They're excited. We're excited. And then we'll be capping off the event with a Fail Fest. And Kevin, I don't know if you've ever participated in one of those. They are good fun. It is meant to be a celebration of failure as a key part of innovation. And it's kind of like a story jam, if you've ever been to one of those. So people get up on stage and they share a story of failure. And more importantly, they share what they learned from that failure and how they applied those learnings to innovate for their organization or their company. And it's Vegas rules. So what happens in FailFest stays in FailFest. And if you want to know who gets on stage and what the fail stories are, or fail tales, you have to attend, and you have to stay till the end, because that'll be our closing event. So I'm particularly excited about that one. I've organized a couple Fail Fest for other associations before, and they're just a blast. It's so fun.
All right. Well, some cool things are happening. Some really fresh things are happening at AIM. You can find out more at aim.org. That's AIIM.org. Find out more about the conference. You can find out more about Tori. You can find out more about all the programs at AIM. And Tori, it's been great speaking with you today. I appreciate your time and being a guest on AIM On Air.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it.